10 inmates basically squeezed through a hole behind a jailhouse toilet. And in doing so, they completely shattered the illusion of security in a major American city.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds exactly like the opening scene of a Hollywood thriller, right? But the reality we're looking at today is, well, it's a lot more complicated and, frankly, pretty terrifying for anyone living near that facility.
Right, absolutely. So welcome to today's deep dive. We have a massive stack of source material sitting in front of us today, official state audits, exhaustive news timelines, and just dozens of these really dense legal indictments.
Oh, yeah, a lot of paperwork on this one.
So much paperwork. But our mission today is to unpack the systemic failures behind the Orleans Parish Justice Center escape. Let me just give you the quick, 90-second rundown of what actually went down.
Let's hear it.
So in May of 2025, 10 inmates, and several of them were actually facing serious murder charges. They tampered with a cell door, ripped a heavy metal toilet entirely off the wall, cut through the underlying plumbing pipes, and just vanished into the night.
Which is insane.
Totally. And it took over 10 agonizing hours for the public to even get a warning that these dangerous individuals were on the streets.
10 hours. Just unbelievable.
Right. And that massive physical breach triggered a relentless manhunt. I mean, it lasted 5 entire months, crossed multiple state lines, and resulted in 26 people being criminally charged.
Yeah, but that's not even the biggest part of the story.
Exactly. Here's the ultimate bombshell of this whole thing. The scandal didn't stop with the inmates. The investigation tunneled straight to the top of the local justice system, dropping a combined 50 felony indictments on the sheriff and her chief financial officer.
Right, so we are looking at just an unprecedented level of institutional collapse here. Our goal is to, sift through all this hard evidence and understand how a modern facility, one that was actually operating under strict federal oversight, could just disintegrate so completely.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading through the physical timeline of the breakout, my initial thought was just like, how do 10 grown men just walk out of a supposedly secure modern jail?
It's a great question.
We really have to look at the sheer mechanics of the breach on May 16th, 2025. So this entire sequence starts at around 12:03 a.m. The inmates exploited this crazy domino effect of broken infrastructure.
Right.
They were able to exit their own individual cells simply because the electronic locks were just defective.
Defective locks in a maximum security environment. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg, honestly.
Yeah.
Once they were out of their individual cells, they congregated and spent roughly 20 minutes tampering with a locked sliding cell door.
20 minutes?
Yeah, 20 minutes. And we're talking about heavy-duty steel doors meant to be impenetrable. The inmates physically derailed the door, like pulling it entirely off its tracks, just to gain entry into one specific cell that offered access to an exterior wall.
See, 20 minutes of forcing a heavy steel door off its track is not a quiet operation.
No, not at all.
And it only gets louder from there. Once inside that target cell, they went to work on a combined sink and toilet unit. And then, these are usually single-piece stainless steel fixtures bolted directly into reinforced walls.
Yeah, they're meant to be permanent.
Right. But the inmates somehow managed to tear that entire plumbing unit completely off the wall. And right behind that toilet was a hollow plumbing chase, like a maintenance area.
Right, an access tunnel, basically.
Exactly. So they used heavy tools to slice through horizontal metal bars covering the hole, and then they literally contorted their bodies and squeezed right through the plumbing access.
Yeah, and from that plumbing corridor, they found an unsecured maintenance area. They fled straight out through a loading dock, easily scaled a perimeter wall, climbed an exterior fence, and finally just sprinted across the Interstate 10 highway.
Wow.
By about 1:30 a.m., 10 men were completely outside the facility's footprint.
And they even made sure to leave a message behind, which I found so bold. Right above the jagged escape hole, the inmates left scribbled graffiti on the wall.
Oh, yeah, the graffiti.
Yeah, they left a few different messages, but 2 of them really jump out from the police reports. They wrote, "To easy, LOL," and "We innocent."
Setting the spelling grammar aside, I mean, that graffiti perfectly encapsulates the psychological environment inside that jail block.
For sure.
It was a blatant taunt aimed at the authorities, but it was also just a cold, factual statement about the complete lack of operational awareness from the guards.
Yeah, because the timeline of their discovery is where I really, truly struggle to comprehend the incompetence.
Oh, it gets so much worse.
The inmates breached the perimeter around 1 a.m., but nobody realized 10 men, and again, several facing murder charges, nobody realized they were missing until an 8:30 a.m. routine head count.
just completely gone for hours.
That is more than 7 hours later. I looked into where the guard assigned to watch that specific pod was during the breakout, and the official report actually says they were away on a meal break.
Think about the vulnerability that creates, right?
Right.
You have a single guard assigned to an entire pod of high-risk inmates, and that guard simply leaves the area unattended.
I just have to challenge the logic of this entire scenario, because if you're listening to this, you know what power tools sound like.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what tearing steel off a wall sounds like? This isn't some high-tech movie heist where thieves use lasers to quietly bypass security.
Right.
This is like a bank vault where the security guard leaves the front door propped open with a brick to go grab a sandwich. Like, how does a group of men use heavy tools on metal plumbing for 20 solid minutes without waking up the entire block, let alone alerting security?
Well, the silence wasn't an accident. They didn't alert security because security was actively protecting them.
Wait, really?
Yeah, when you look at the indictments, the reason nobody heard the grinding metal or the crashing door is that the inmates had direct help from the people holding the keys.
Oh, wow. So it was an inside job.
A massive inside job. A breach of this magnitude requires human complicity to succeed. Authorities didn't just arrest the 10 escapees, right? They charged 26 individuals in total. 16 of those people were accessories to the escape.
16 people helped them pull this off. That is insane.
Right. And this included family members orchestrating logistics on the outside, sure, but crucially, it included staff on the inside.
That is terrifying.
It is. The most chilling detail in the official reports involves a jail employee who was monitoring the live surveillance feeds. They reportedly watched the escape unfold on camera in real time and simply chose not to report it to the floor deputies.
That is staggering, just watching it happen.
Yeah, just watching.
I also read about the actual removal of the toilet, because pulling a toilet off a wall usually triggers a massive flood, right? Which would instantly trigger alarms or pressure drops in a central maintenance system.
Exactly. It's a huge mess.
But they had help from a jail plumber, a guy named Sterling Williams. The indictments charge Williams with purposefully shutting off the main water valve to those specific cells just to make removing the toilet easier for the inmates.
Which is just wild.
He neutralized the building's own natural alarm system.
Which fundamentally changes how you view this entire event. Because of that inside help and because of that 7-hour head start, the police couldn't just, set up a local perimeter and catch these guys hiding in the woods behind the jail.
Right, they were long gone.
The inmates scattered. It triggered a multi-state logistical nightmare.
Let's track that manhunt, actually, because it required local police, state police, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshals all pooling resources. They did capture 3 of the inmates on the very first day.
Yeah, the quick ones.
Right. Kendall Miles, a 21-year-old facing weapons charges, he was found hiding underneath a parked car in a French Quarter hotel garage within, 12 hours.
But the men facing the most severe charges managed to flee the state entirely. I mean, Linton Van Buren, Leo Tate, and Jermaine Donald were all facing murder charges.
Yeah.
Van Buren was tracked down in Baton Rouge, but Tate and Donald had crossed state lines and made it all the way to Walker County, Texas, before they were apprehended 10 days later.
And then you have the sheer audacity of an inmate like Antoine Massey. This detail from our sources is just wild. This was Massey's 3rd time escaping from a jail facility since 2007.
Third time.
3rd time. The system knew he was a flight risk, but he was actually deemed ineligible for an electronic ankle monitor because his criminal history showed he would just routinely slice them off.
So they just didn't give him one.
Right. So while he was on the run this time, dodging a massive federal dragnet, he went onto Instagram Live to broadcast to the world and claim his innocence.
On Instagram Live, you can't make this up.
Police recognized the background of the house in the video, they raided the location, and he still managed to evade them. They finally caught him in late June in the Holly Grove neighborhood.
I mean, imagine living in that neighborhood knowing a fugitive with a history of escaping is actively dodging SWAT teams right next door.
It's terrifying.
And he wasn't even the last one caught. It took nearly 5 full months to track down the final escapee, Derek Groves.
5 months.
Yeah. He had a previous conviction for second-degree murder and was finally captured in Atlanta, Georgia in October after a tense standoff with law enforcement.
Which really forces you to ask a terrifying question, I think. If the internal staff is actively helping inmates shut off valves and ignore camera feeds, does standard security protocol even matter anymore?
It doesn't. Not at all. When the system degrades to the point where a plumber is turning off the water to facilitate an escape, you aren't dealing with a few isolated rogue employees.
Mm.
You're dealing with a complete institutional collapse. The
We're
culture of the building itself has failed.
Yeah, and when I looked at the subsequent state audit, the numbers proved that this wasn't just a bad night, it was a systemic breakdown.
Oh, the numbers are brutal.
The state descended on the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office to evaluate their operations, and the statistics they pulled are completely staggering. First, they looked at the staffing ratio. From January 2022 to December 2025, the inmate population surged by 46.6%. But the number of deputies and staff actually assigned to monitor that booming population, that increased by only 2.6%.
You cannot safely operate a heavy-duty correctional facility with that massive of an imbalance. It just creates a massive vacuum of authority. And the state audit proved that because of this vacuum, the staff simply abandoned their daily responsibilities.
They just stopped doing the work.
Exactly. Policy required staff to perform 9,072 individual security checks during the week of the escape.
And they barely scratched the surface of that requirement. They performed only 2,700 checks.
They skipped over 6,000 mandated safety checks in 7 days.
6,000.
Yeah, you don't skip 6,000 checks by accident. That is an active, widespread choice across the entire staff to not do the job. Furthermore, safety inspections were only conducted during 206 of the 322 required shifts.
And when the auditors zoomed in on Pod 1D, which is the exact housing unit where the escape happened, the paperwork revealed an even darker reality.
Yeah, the paperwork is where it gets crazy.
The required daily inspection forms for that specific pod were left completely blank for the day shift before the escape, the night shift before the escape, and the morning shift of the breakout.
Just totally blank.
3 consecutive shifts where nobody even bothered to pick up a pen, let alone walk the block. But here's where the story pivots from negligence to outright corruption. The audit uncovered a mechanical reason for this massive staffing void.
Right. It wasn't just short staffing.
Exactly. It wasn't just a tough labor market. The audit revealed severe payroll violations regarding off-duty details. Deputies were routinely clocking in and getting paid for their official jail shifts while they were physically miles away, working off-duty security details for private events or businesses.
The mechanism of that fraud is incredible, honestly. A deputy uses their badge to swipe into the municipal payroll system, establishing they're on the clock at the jail. Then they just leave the perimeter, stand guard at a grocery store or a private party for cash, and collect 2 paychecks simultaneously.
That is just brazen.
And supervisors have to be actively ignoring the physical absence of these deputies on the cell blocks for this to work.
Wait, so they weren't just dangerously understaffed. Taxpayers were actively paying the salaries of ghost employees.
Ghost employees, exactly.
That is like paying a premium monthly subscription for a top-tier home security system, but the cameras bolted to your house are just printed pieces of cardboard? Like, how does institutional oversight miss a scam that massive?
They miss it, or, they tolerate it, when the leadership at the very top fails to enforce basic accountability. If you're paying taxes in that parish, you are essentially funding a ghost shift.
Wow.
And that is exactly the conclusion the Louisiana Attorney General reached.
Yeah.
A systemic failure of this magnitude eventually rolls all the way up the chain of command.
Which brings us to the massive legal fallout at the end of this timeline. Just days before her term in office was set to end, Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrill indicted Sheriff Susan Hudson and her Chief Financial Officer, Bianca Brown. And we are not talking about minor administrative charges here. Sheriff Hudson was hit with a 30-count felony indictment.
30 counts.
Mm-hmm.
And the charges include 14 counts of malfeasance in office, filing false public records, obstruction of justice, and sweeping conspiracy charges to cover it all up.
And CFO Bianca Brown faces a 20-count felony indictment for the exact same types of charges: malfeasance, manufacturing, false records, and obstruction.
Right.
The Attorney General was really blunt in her assessment. She stated clearly on the record that while the sheriff didn't personally pry the metal toilet off the wall or, open the exterior doors for the escapees, her intentional refusal to follow basic legal requirements directly enabled this mass breakout.
She created the environment.
Right, she created the environment where an escape was inevitable.
And if we look at the broader historical context, the irony of this situation is incredibly bitter. The Orleans Parish Justice Center hasn't been operating in the shadows, It has been under a federal consent decree for 12 years.
Yeah, I spent some time looking into this consent decree concept because it seemed completely backwards to me. You have a jail essentially taken over by the federal government back in 2012.
Because the Department of Justice sued the jail over horrific baseline conditions, rampant violence, and a severe lack of medical care. A federal judge placed the jail under oversight to force legal reforms.
Okay.
Millions of local taxpayer dollars were spent complying with this. Federal monitors were specifically appointed to inspect the jail regularly and issue binding reports to the court.
Wait, so they had federal monitors walking the halls? People were actually watching this happen.
They were watching, and they were actively warning the leadership. Just weeks before the escape, a federal monitor's report explicitly warned that the jail was operating with a 28% staff vacancy rate.
Unbelievable.
They pointed out the unsupervised housing units and called it a severe and ongoing threat. But here's the mechanism of failure, right? Knowing about a problem doesn't fix a problem. Federal monitors don't have keys to the cells, and they don't do the hiring. They just write the reports.
Especially when the people actually in charge are distracted by massive political fights over money. Our sources detail this huge ongoing battle over something called Phase 3.
Oh yeah, Phase 3.
I want to break this down because it perfectly illustrates bureaucratic distraction. Phase 3 was a proposed $109 million mental health facility that the federal court mandated the city to build.
Right.
But instead of focusing on daily operations, city leaders, the sheriff's office, and local advocates spent years locked in a bitter political gridlock over the cost and the optics of expanding the jail's footprint.
Exactly. Everyone was staring at the blueprints for a new building, fighting over budget allocations, while the existing building was literally crumbling around them. They diverted their attention to the political fight,
Yeah.
and the basic security of the facility just evaporated.
It is a stunning sequence of events when you step back and look at it. You have a jail operating under the highest possible level of federal judicial scrutiny. Yet the electronic locks don't work, the guards are physically absent collecting second paychecks, the plumbers are turning off the alarm systems, and the safety paperwork is entirely faked.
Yet that is the core insight we have to take away from these audits and indictments.
Mm-hmm.
Federal oversight, consent decrees, and strict court mandates, they're ultimately just ink on paper.
Yeah.
A federal judge cannot physically walk the cell blocks at 2 in the morning to make sure a guard isn't taking an unauthorized meal break. If the local leadership refuses to enforce the most basic legal requirements, and if they tolerate a culture where falsified records and ghost employees become standard operating procedure, absolutely no amount of federal monitoring will keep the doors locked.
It's just a Band-Aid.
Right. The entire justice system relies entirely on the integrity of the people executing the daily operations. When that integrity vanishes, the physical security of the building vanishes right along with it.
Let's recap this incredible journey because the chain reaction here is just fascinating. We started our deep dive looking at a physical jagged hole behind a jailhouse toilet.
Yep.
But as we dug into the audits, that physical hole exposed a massive hole in operational staffing. And that staffing void ultimately revealed a staggering void in leadership and accountability, taking down a sitting sheriff and a chief financial officer with dozens of felony indictments.
And as you listen to this, it is vital to remember why this specific type of institutional failure matters directly to you. We all rely on these complex institutions to function competently in order to keep our communities safe.
Exactly.
When basic management fails to this degree, mammoth amounts of your taxpayer money are wasted, funding fraudulent payrolls and financing prolonged multi-agency manhunts across several states. But more importantly, public safety is immediately threatened when individuals facing active murder charges are allowed to literally pry open the back door and walk onto the streets.
It really forces you to rethink the entire concept of institutional security. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today.
Let's hear it.
This specific jail in New Orleans had federal monitors actively checking in on them. They had state auditors crunching the payroll numbers. They had constant glaring media attention and political fights over a $100 million expansion.
All eyes were on them.
Right. And despite all of that visibility, the staff still easily managed to fake thousands of security checks and hide ghost employees for years. So if this level of systemic corruption and complete incompetence can thrive under the brightest possible spotlight, what on earth is happening right now in the thousands of local, completely unmonitored county jails operating in the dark across the rest of the country?